Hey, welcome to Friends of Planetshakers. I'm so excited to have one of my great friends with us today, Ps Mark Varughese. He leads a global movement called Kingdomcity. They are now in 16 cities with 27 campuses. Just started 14 years ago, and it is a privilege and honor to have one of the most outstanding up-and-coming leaders in the world today, Ps Mark Varughese. Welcome, Ps Mark. Great to have you.
Pastor Russell, what a privilege, what an honor. You're a great friend and mentor. Thank you for having us today.
That's great. I think we should get rid of the pastor because we call ourselves Mark and Russell. So that's just for everyone else.
Let's go with that.
Yeah. So I've known you. I think we were talking beforehand. We go back, have met sort of 1996. I think I was doing youth camps for the church you were in, and you were there, which was crazy.
Yeah.
So what were you doing in 1996?
1996, I was 21 years of age. I was in my fourth year of law school. But growing up in Perth, I was always involved in church. And so I'd serve, I'm mainly in the worship team, playing keyboard or bass or whatever. And you were one of the preeminent youth speakers in the nation at the time. I think you might have been doing Youth Alive, but you'd come over for youth camps. And so you wouldn't have known me, but I knew you from just watching and listening, and I'd be in a lot of those meetings, and yeah, that was a long time ago, but yeah, I remember.
I actually think I remember your brother Ian playing bass on the youth camp, because good musicianship always impressed me, and so I actually do think I knew of you guys because I saw, and I would go, who are those guys? But one of the things I always have loved about you, always, is your hunger for the presence of God. It is the thing that defines you, and it's the thing that defines me. That's why we're so good friends. And you grew up in an environment that just wanted the presence of God, and it's just increased. Would you say that's one of your hallmarks is the presence of God?
Yeah, I grew up in a conservative background before we moved to Australia, and the church we went to, I knew God was real, but it was distant, sovereign, powerful, but not engaged. And then when we came to Australia, I grew up in this church, I was probably 10, and the pastor talked about God like he knew him. And I thought, that's crazy. And I'm a 10-year-old kid, but it set off a desire in me to go, I didn't know God was intimate and involved. I knew he was real, but sovereign and at a distance. And so it probably set off a burning desire to know God. I didn't have an agenda to do this. I wasn't planning. I had no ambition to work for God. I just wanted to know him. I didn't think you could know him. And so that just became the all-consuming desire as I grew up. And then everything else that's followed has come out of that, really.
One of the things I talk about is defining encounters that you have with the presence of God. Were there any defining encounters you had growing up that, that in that pursuit of the presence of God?
Yeah, so I remember wanting to be filled with the Holy Spirit. I didn't know what that meant. I had no grid for that because of our background, but one day a lady preacher was preaching in a church, and again, my background was, didn't even believe probably in women preachers, but she has a word of knowledge, which I didn't believe in either, and then she calls me out and says, son, God wants to fill you with the Holy Spirit. I'm like, who told her? Because I didn't know about prophecy, I didn't know about any of that. Wow. And then she prays for me from a distance. I hit the deck. So a woman preaching, which I didn't believe, had a word of knowledge, which I didn't believe, wow. and I got filled with the Holy Spirit, which I didn't believe, although I wanted it because I was hungry. Yeah. And I hit the deck, which I didn't believe. I didn't know what that was about. And for the next 45 minutes, I felt something like I've never felt in my entire life. And it was this personal but powerful, it was like a river. It was just the most overwhelming experience. I didn't even know how to talk about it to my friends and family. I just kept it within myself. But so there would be moments like that. That was massive. Wow. But then growing up in our church, there would often be lingering moments at the altar, and there'd be a handful that I could say totally changed my life when you'd look at the fruit that came out of it. But I think the hunger and the sensitivity for the presence of God is like oxygen that you can go a little while without it, but you can't go too long without it once you've tasted it.
Yeah, totally. So let's fast forward. You're in this youth group, having encounters with God. You're at law school. So in the year 2000, you're a practicing lawyer. And I think that's your first Planetshakers conference you ever came to. What was that experience like?
Yeah, so I just left the church I was in, led by David Storer, and joined Neil. And so Neil invited me to join his church, which was, I remember thinking, oh man, why does he want me? Because I was a lawyer, I wasn't even on staff.
Yeah.
So I joined, and he saw something in me, but we joined the journey, and because of his relationship with you, we went to Adelaide. And I remember consciously thinking, I have never been in a room with this much energy. I grew up in an environment of revival and Holy Spirit, but this had a force behind it. It was like an intensity. Even I talk about it now, it comes to me. It was like, what is this? And of course, I love the worship, the music. It was just another level. But I just been in the environment, and I remember thinking, I think this is what we want. I don't know if we have it, but this is what we want. And there was something about it. I remember on that same trip, you pulled John and Debbie Herbert out, who'd been on their honeymoon.
Wow.
They just got married.
And you grew up with them, didn't you? You grew up with John.
I grew up with them in Perth.
Yeah.
I grew up, John and I were great friends growing up. But you called all three of us up in Adelaide on the steps, I remember, and you said, these guys are on the honeymoon, and then you had to clarify, I was just John and Debbie on the honeymoon. I was just standing there because you called me up. And then, but you prophesied, you said there's a sword coming out of your mouth. I remember just being in that environment in that year and thinking, what is this? Like, I mean, I knew of you, but I'd never been in that environment.
Yeah.
It was crazy. And I think I've been to every conference since.
Yeah, you have. I always see you in the crowd, and the reason why I do is because I can see your hunger for God, and hungry people stand out to me, and we'll be in a moment, and I'll just turn, and I see you with tears running down your face, hands lifted high, and every time I see that, I am so blessed, because that's exactly why we do what we do, is for people to encounter the presence of God. So it's a great, great thing that you carry in that area.
What I think for me is every year since that year, I've made it a priority because it is one of the only environments that I've been in that has such a potent intensity, and everything from the worship to the speakers to the ministry, there's an impartation in the atmosphere. And so even in the highs and lows of the 20 years that have followed since 2000, it was like a fuel injected intensity of 3 days, 4 days, 2 days, whatever I could be there for. It resonates like Mary and Elizabeth, the whole thing in the womb. And so to be in that space where, for me, I don't have the responsibility, I don't have to think about all the stuff that you have to think about, when it comes to running a meeting, and just soak in that is just, it's been absolutely shaping on my entire journey.
That's awesome. I just did your conference last year, when we could meet at conferences, and I just walked in there, and it just feels like home. This hunger for the presence of God, wanting to change the world, wanting to release the glory of God across the earth. And I'm just so honored to see that God is using you and Jemima and the Kingdomcity team around the world. I just walked into that place and I went, this just feels like home. And God connects you with people. 2000, you start coming. You eventually go on staff at Neil's church. What year was that?
Yep. That was 2003, January. So I quit law, which was at that time massive because, again, my family background, everyone's professional. No one's in ministry in that sense. And so, again, people are like, why do you want to do that? Do you want to be poor? Like, there's no real grid for why I'm doing that. There was no major signs, but I knew God was telling me to do this. So Neil asked me to join team. I joined team. And then for 3 years, I served in that environment. And you'd come across fairly regularly then as well. Yeah. And again, every time you were in the room, it was like life would awaken within me again, afresh. Yeah. There were great things happening everywhere, but there was always that resonance. And it was pretty crazy. That season, I learned a lot. I grew a lot. God was probably dismantling things in me as well. I was changing. No idea what was to follow. Yeah. And then, of course, what happened.
So you're on Neil's team. I had this group of young leaders that I would bring to the Gold Coast or different places, and to really just dream about what we could do together. Neil was one of those, Paul Geerling, Sam Monk, Glenn Barrett.
John Cameron was there.
John Cameron.
Martin Steele. Martin Steele.
Yeah, Graham Kirkwood. And so we're actually in this hotel, and Neil brings you along, and normally we wouldn't let people come along. Normally that wouldn't be the case.
No.
But I did feel something in my heart that God wanted to do in you. So you're in that room, and we just start ministering out of nowhere, really. We're just talking. Can you go back to that experience? It was pretty amazing.
Oh, it's so clear. It's I would say one of the three most defining moments of my entire life. Not only because of the fruit that come out of it, but I'll never forget it. So the only reason I was there, I said to Neil, the months leading up to that, I started to feel restless, and there's a whole heap of reasons for that. But really, I remember buying a world map, right, sticking it on my desk in Perth, and just staring at it for hours on a day, because I thought maybe I just can't do this. Maybe I'm not meant to be in ministry. Maybe I'm meant to just travel the world, quit, go watch football matches or whatever. And so I didn't know what that was about. And so I said to Neil one day out of nowhere, "Hey, Neil, I really want to go on a roller coaster." He goes, "What?" "Yeah, I want to go on a roller coaster." He goes, "Well, I'm going to the Gold Coast and for meetings with Russell and a few guys." And he was kind enough. He goes, "Come along and just sit in the conditions. You got to sit in a couple of days of meetings, and then we can go to Dreamworld or wherever." And so I'm like, "Oh, wow, that's kind." So I went. There, and I remember you guys were all in a circle talking, because you're all friends. You're all either just starting churches or certainly leading movements, and you were the leader and the common link. But I was on the outside. I remember sitting there often, just watching, leaning in. And halfway through a day in the afternoon, you say, "Mark, tell us what's going on with you." And I say, and I wasn't in a great place internally. And I remember thinking, I think I'm done. And I said this, I said a bunch of stuff, but I remember saying this trigger phrase. I said, "All I know is that while I've got breath in my lungs and strength in my bones, I want to serve God." And then the place went awkwardly silent.
Yeah.
And it's like God's presence literally just filled that room. There was no music. There was no, we weren't in a meeting. We were just having a chat. God's presence literally falls in the room. You start crying. I start crying. I fall to the ground. I don't know what happened. And I was gone. It was heavy. And I can't remember too much of the detail of the next 40 minutes, but what I remember being totally, I remember feeling totally dismantled, and I know God's telling me, move to Malaysia, because there was talk of me going there to help a church plant that Neil had started, and there was, some ideas around that. And this was like, this is a divine setup. And for the next half an hour, you and a bunch of the guys prayed over me. You were prophesying. It was so overwhelming. I call it my burning bush experience, because for me, it was literally the thing that triggered the entire journey. And for the next 3 days, I wore like a second skin, this tangible sense of God on me. I remember not saying a word, and you just literally started saying, "Whatever God is going to do with you, I'm going to back. I'm going to be with you." And so you got to realize I'm working for Neil, and Neil is your friend, not me. And it's like in that day, something shifted, and your sensitivity and investment into what happened was so real. And all the other pastors in the room couldn't deny it. They were all, everyone's crying, and they all go, "Yep, I'm coming. I'll give money. I'll do whatever." And without me opening my mouth at the end of that encounter, I think they'd raised some funds to help me, but it was so real. It was so tangible. I could feel it like a thick skin for about 3 or 4 days. I went back that day. I called my parents, I think. I said, "Yeah, I'm moving to Malaysia." They're like, "What?" I said, "Yep." And then within 4 months, we sort of wrapped things up in Perth, and I sold my house, bought a one-way ticket to an Islamic country without a visa, with no clue how it was going to happen. But it was so real because of that encounter. And the encounter is like a coat of protection that just insulates you against fear. I mean, I had moments after that thing wore off. It's not like I then was on a cloud nine. There were moments of like, can I do this? Is this God? But I look back to the burning bush, and I cannot deny it. It was so real.
Yeah. It's that anchor that when God touches you. It's like when God spoke to me about starting Planetshakers, I had an encounter with God. Even though I've had external things attack me and things try to take my faith away, I can always go back to that reference point and know that I know that I know. And that's what's happened with you. So you're a single young man, give up your law, or you give up working for Neil, get on a plane, one-way ticket, and fly to Malaysia. You turn up and you start a church. The church that had been started by Neil went another way, and you start a brand new church. How was that experience?
It was crazy. I didn't know what I was doing, but the adrenaline was amazing. The energy was amazing. And I love Malaysian food. And so I've had some extended family there. So I stayed with one of my aunties because I had no accommodation, nothing. And so over the first 3 months, I bought a car, tried to work out a visa to stay there. Like, how am I going to live? And at the same time, I met one guy who I knew, Jai, and he's now our pastor in Dubai. But he was local. He knew the system. So we met. And I had a laptop, and so we met at Starbucks because there was free Wi-Fi. And we'd do notes, and we'd go, okay, what are we going to do? And I said, do you have any friends who've got an apartment? And he had a friend, and we met in an apartment. And we've got some very terrible pictures of this, but really we had a meeting, and I said, bring your friends, and I'll buy noodles for anybody who wants to come. And about 12 people showed up, and half of them were looking at me strange, but I'm still feeling, I preach a message out of John 21. They must have thought I was crazy. And all they want to know is, why did you leave law? Because that's the Asian question. Like, who quits their profession? And then, why did you leave Australia? Because everyone's trying to get to Australia from Malaysia and to get educated. And so God does a reversal in me, and I quit the profession, and then I quit the country because God's taken me back to where I grew up. And literally that whole year was a one wild adventure. And I think because the encounter so marked me, and it marked you in terms of our friendship, I remember the first year not having a clue, but you'd ring me every Monday. My phone would ring about 2 p.m., roughly 2 p.m. my time, 1 o'clock, 1, 2, and it'd be you. I'm going, Russell Evans is calling me. Man, this is crazy. So, and you'd call me and go, how'd you go? How's the weekend? Because I got no pastor at that point. I don't know what I'm doing. And your encouragement was invaluable. It was just an exhilarating year of starting from nothing and seeing it grow. At the end of the first year, it was about 200 people roughly. Wow. But I thought that was revival. That was a miracle.
It was pretty great what God was doing. I can actually remember when I would call you because I'd be at my children's basketball practice, and I would go outside because it'd be 4 o'clock here or something around there. And I'd go outside and I'd ring you and see how you're going. So I actually vividly remember me walking up and down the car park talking to you. And so you're 200 people, then what happens the next year?
Yes, the next year I meet Jemima. That's a whole nother story for another day. But we meet on our first coffee. We decide to get married. Paul Dealing, a great friend of yours and ours, was the mutuals. He set it up, but at that time I'm a bit wary about, I'm in Malaysia, she's in Brisbane. Yeah. We meet, we have one coffee, we decide to get married. We pull out the BlackBerry back in the day and we work out the date in the first coffee before the refill. And literally 4 months later, we're married. And you were at our wedding, along with a lot of our pastor friends. And that all happens in the second year. And she moves the next day, leaves her family, her church, her covering, her job, changes her name, changes everything, and moves to join me. And I'm like, we're going to die in Malaysia. And then the next year, I end up back in Perth.
So it's quite funny. You sent me a little clip the other day of me prophesying over you at your wedding. I was looking at me was interesting, but it was a pretty amazing thing, actually.
There was 2 clips I sent you. One was, because I'm just getting all of this out for my book. A lot of this was relevant to the story. And so one of them was at the 1 year anniversary of our church, someone asked you to do a little video, and for 30 seconds you said, Mark Varughese, you're doing a great job. Well done, CCKL, 1 year. Amazing. Imagine what God could do in 10 years, 20, 30,000 people. And I remember reading at the time going, oh, he's so positive. And yet that's what's evolved. And then at the same time, you had at my wedding, you started prophesying nations. I was getting married. I'm not thinking about church planting. But at the same time, it was this incredible moment. And now when I watch it in hindsight, it's like you prophesied nations that in the last 2 years we've just started to go into.
It's amazing. It is incredible.
It's crazy.
Sometimes you do things by accident that you're just inspired by God at the time, and you're powering your words. So you're married. I come and this is a funny story. I got to get this story. You're married. I come and preach for you in Malaysia. And we're driving in the car and you begin to talk to me. What was that conversation?
Okay, so the context is the first time you came, which is after I just started single, you'd come, I think, the 10th week of our church. Again, you promised to come and you came. And I remember going, Russell Evans is coming. I've got like 50 people. This is so bad. And it started raining. I was panicking. You're like, don't worry, I came for you. I didn't come for all these other people. You know, your friends are those who believe in you. And you had such a shaping role in that first year. Second year, you come back, I'm married. Church didn't grow much in the second year at all, right? So we grew great in first year. I get married. Second year, it's like plateauing a bit. And I'm thinking, you know, we're now friends. And you go, how's it going? And but you're a mentor. So you're a friend, but you're also like a big brother leader speaking into this. And I go, oh, look, I'm just taking, you know, it hasn't really grown much the first year. I'm just getting used to marriage and, you know, I need probably a year to settle in. And you look at me and go, settle in? You just got to pull your finger out. Just keep going. Like, what are you doing? And I remember going, oh. And I honestly, that was so funny. But I remember, look, I don't know. I remember a lot of these moments so vividly because it shaped not only the hunger, but the drive. I remember thinking, you know what? I'd probably now not let anybody take time off after weddings because of that comment.
I'm sorry for all those people. When you told me that made me laugh. The church is doing well in Malaysia. It's now year 3. And you get a call from Neil to come back to Perth. What was that? What happened there?
Again, crazy. So I'm 2.5 years in. I'm now starting to go, God, how do I do this? Jemima is now expecting our first son, Zeke. Wow. And I'm like, God, what do I do with the government? Because every 3 months I have to leave the country. How's this going to work? And within those 3 months, I had a call from someone in East Malaysia, in Kuching, and a call from Singapore, unrelated, saying, would you come and start your church in these? I'm like, who does that? No, are you crazy? There's no, before multi-site was common. And so I just said, no, didn't think about it. It's hard enough leading one group of people, even if it was a couple of hundred. Then Neil calls and Neil says, would you come back and take on this church? Meaning, would I leave Malaysia? And I said to Neil, Neil, I love you, but you know, I had an encounter to come here. I need more than a phone call to leave it. Yeah. And he goes, yeah, fair enough, totally. He called me back the next day. He goes, okay, you don't need to leave it, but we feel we're going to join Russell and Sam in Planetshakers, and we feel you're meant to take the church. I'm going, what does that mean? How do I do that? And so that started the process in 2008. We come back, but we felt God all over it. I remember talking to you about it, and I'm like, how do we do this? Maybe Australia is a great base because we're both Australian citizens, but we didn't really have someone to lead that. And I was willing. I said, God, I'll do whatever. But I felt God, we fasted for 40 days. Jemima and I, she couldn't fast totally because she was pregnant, but we fasted and said, God, I don't know. And I spoke to our leaders, but our leaders in KL who said, listen, you left Australia to come here, go for it. You know, I didn't need their permission, but they all were so excited because the first 3 years felt like a constant faith journey. Yeah. So they're like, hey, this is another thing. It's not done, but let's do it. And that set off the next 5 years of me living between Perth and KL. And every 3 months, we'd sort of pack up and go to the other home, and we'd live between country and country for 5 years. Yeah.
I remember you saying to me this, you said, we're going to have one church in 2 cities. And you said, I don't know anyone that's ever done that before, but I feel this is what God's telling me. And I was like, yeah, that's great, because I wanted to encourage you. And there's also a little voice going, how's this going to work? And what I've discovered with you is you just get a word and then go. You know, a lot of people, and I think I wrote this in the foreword of your book, which we're going to talk about, which I want to encourage everyone to get. It's a great book on faith and the journey of faith. And, you know, I remember sitting in a board meeting with you, and the 2 cities were doing well. And there was a third one that you had on your heart, Phnom Penh. And everything in me, because I worked in a bank, I think strategically, I think in faith, but I also think practically. And I'm like, you're just getting these 2 churches functioning. How in the heck are you going to get Phnom Penh? What leaders do you have? And they don't even speak English, at least in Malaysia and Perth. And I'm sitting in there and we're discussing, and and you were like, yes, yeah, no, I can see that. But I saw something in you that says, no, I feel God wants to do this. So we had no resource to do it. We had no people to do it. When I'm talking we, I'm on your leadership team, so that's a we. We. And we're all part of a family anyway. And I'm like, how's this going to happen? And you did, and it boomed. I was like, if he ever says anything about any other city again, I'm going to go, yep, go for it.
See, the challenge, and you know this because of your journey, but when you feel faith and you feel God in the moment, you have to declare it in the moment.
Yeah.
Because if you wait too long and then your reason kicks in, you lose the faith in the declaration. There's something life-givingly, it carries more than just, it's a declaration, but it carries life. And if you declare it in that moment, that's why declaration is so important. In the moment, you've got to speak it out. Don't go, I'll write that down and think about it later.
Yeah.
Just declare it no matter how ridiculous it looks. And that's the power of declaration.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I needed that moment. Like even Perth and KL, you're right. I'm like, is this going to work? And I had an internal fleece once, that the moment passes. And I'm, God, if either of these congregations suffer, I'm going to give it up. Like I'm having this dialogue with God. And at the time when I took on Perth and KL, they're both about roughly 300 each. And then the next 5 years, they both grow to about 1,500 each. Wow. So I'm shocked that even though I'm not there half the year, both are growing. And I'm thinking they each deserve a full-time pastor because this is not a normal model. But I realized then, okay, if God says to do it, just do it. And so, but the problem was towards the end of that, when you and a number of the other leaders joined me, and that's when we formed Kingdomcity Global.
Yeah.
And I needed an apostolic oversight to speak into it because after a while, Perth and KL felt like two wives. Like, if you hear, and that's not biblical or ethical or whatever, Jemima and I felt like a rope in a tug of war. These guys want this, these guys want this. And it's not bad. We're one church, but two governances. And you can't serve two masters. You'll love one, despise the other.
Yeah.
So I'm like, we need one leadership. And so that's when we formed Apostolic Oversight. And obviously you were the first guy I reached out to, and you graciously said yes. A number of the other pastors, Martin Steele, David Storer, Graham Kirkwood, the ones who'd been with me from day one, said yes, formed that, and that we had leaders join us from Perth and KL. You might remember this, 2013 in KL. So I said, listen, we have to meet. So I asked our leaders, we had about 190 leaders in Perth at the time, would you fly at your own expense, take 3 days leave, come join us in Malaysia? To my shock, about 175 did. I mean, if 175 leaders turned up on a normal leaders night out of 190, it's revival. Normally only 50% turn up. And so for that many to come, and there was faith in the room. That's when we announced Cambodia, and that's the time we had that board meeting that you're referring. But there was such an impartation in the room with not only you and the guys there, but it felt unity. There felt like there was now, oil can flow from their head all the way down to the edge, because it wasn't a divided vision, even though I was over the two. There was now a sense of this thing's heading in the one direction. And I still till today, whether I'm at pastors' conferences or whatever, point to that meeting, that 3 days in KL. There's only 350 leaders in the room, so I consider everyone in that room family.
Yeah.
And it was the catalytic moment that triggered not just Cambodia, but then every year after that, Singapore, Botswana, Dubai, and all the rest since.
Wow, what a session we just had with Ps Mark Varughese. Part 2 is coming up. You don't want to miss it. It's going to be amazing. Have a great, great day. See you next time.